Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining today's session on mastering document control within SharePoint. Over the next hour, we'll explore how you can take full control of your documents, avoid the common pitfalls that we tend to see across organizations that we work with, and put into place a system that actually works day to day. So for context, I'm Martin. I'm the sales team leader here at Valto. I've worked closely with organizations over a few years now across every sector who are struggling with that document management piece within SharePoint. I've seen what does work, I've seen what doesn't work, and what we have, I think, is a really reliable product. It will hopefully give you some good ideas how you can manage that document control moving forward. If you've got any questions throughout the session, just drop them in the comment box below. We'll make sure that we cover them all as we go into the Q&A at the end. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive in at how you can master document control within SharePoint. Great, so we'll just recap the agenda that we're going to cover today. The first piece we're going to look at here is, of course, the common problems that we tend to find. So we'll spend a bit of time just looking at issues that people face when they're looking at document control here within SharePoint. We're then going to move on to actually the demo of some solutions in terms of how we can help you with that piece there. So looking at SharePoint, how you can use things like reviews and approvals, how we can look at different review periods and different review dates that you're able to apply to those documents, different permission sets within the SharePoint platform as well. So we'll cover all of that in the demo of the solution that we've got. We'll then go ahead and look at actually a case study where we've done work to help an organization actually pass their ISO audit and just get better control over their documentation. So let me ask you something. Have you ever gone hunting for a document, hunting for a file, and suddenly it's not there, or you discover that there's 3 different versions of it, you don't know who's been editing the last one, you don't know if the one that you found is the correct version, and it's all just a bit of a mess. So we call that document chaos. And a lot of organizations in recent times have spent a lot of times putting up kind of defensive walls. They've gone ahead and they've made sure that actually external threats can't get in, which is great, but actually behind the wall, everything is just a little bit unstructured, and it's making lives difficult for employees to find the right documentation that they're looking for. You're not able to see the latest versions of these documents. Perhaps they're locked behind certain sites or teams or documents that perhaps you don't have permissions to, and it's all just a little bit of a mess. So we're going to take a look at some of those common problems that people tend to see. So let's take a look at some of the common problems we tend to find when we speak with organizations. The first, of course, is lost files. Important evidence files are vanishing. Perhaps they're being stored in email inboxes, they're in personal drives, and to everybody else, they just can't find it. So it's perceived as being lost. We then have wrong versions. So documents that you think are the final draft that you're sending over to that potential client or supplier. You finally got all the information together, you send it across, only to discover that it's the draft from 5 weeks ago. We can then see things like approvals coming into play as well. Perhaps you've got signatures, but they're scattered across emails, they're maybe embedded into spreadsheets or printed copies, and nothing seems to be tying it together. So you don't know who last approved the documents, if it is that right version that you're allowed to go ahead and share externally or internally, and it all just becomes a bit of a mess. And of course, this is going to cause issues. Failed ISO audits. If the auditor can't see a clear, controlled process, you risk non-compliance. And worse, you might pass once, and that's great, but maintaining that compliance without control, it is really, really difficult, and you'll absolutely come across different stumbling blocks along the way. Wasted time is certainly another issue. How many hours do your team lose every week chasing the right file, checking whether it is signed off, or trying to piece together that paper trail to know for certain that what they've got is absolutely the correct document? And costly mistakes. So using the wrong version of a document can lead to rework, customers' complaints, or even legal challenges. So, if you are sending across draft documents or documents that should only be kept internally because there is no control in place, you might find that you're coming across these issues, and that's certainly where we can step in and help out. And finally, regulatory risks. So lack of control doesn't just impact your ISO certification. It could be that your organization has to be compliant with different regulations and legislations that are there. So not being compliant risks other regulators perhaps flagging you as non-compliant, and that could have some serious implications down the line. Now that we're fully aware of the problems and issues caused by document chaos, let's take a look at a SharePoint solution designed to address them all. Okay, great. So let's take a look at how SharePoint can help us with our document control. What we have here is a solution we've built. This is purely an example on an example SharePoint environment, but it can really give you some ideas as to how SharePoint can be used to manage your documents and handle things like review and approvals, handle aspects like permissions and governance around your documents as well. And it's a really simple, sleek, easy to use system. The system is made up of 3 main parts. We're looking at part 1 at the moment. That is this initial landing landing page. This is for a completely made up company that are called Holler. We can see the Holler logo in the middle there, lots of kind of grays, and you can kind of see that pulling through the actual landing page itself. And then the rest of this landing page here is really made up of larger tiles. And these tiles are just call to actions to take you through to the actual system itself. So through to the document library, which we'll come on to in just a second. But it's really important to highlight that the tiles, the links that you see on this page, these can all be updated. Everything in here can be aligned to your branding, to your imagery. There is no coding or development experience needed in order to get these pages really looking how you want them to look. But you can go ahead and do this just like you would edit a widget on a smartphone. That's probably the best comparison. You can drag and drop and customize the size, update the links, no coding experience or anything like that needed to update these pages. But this initial landing page, really great way to drive traffic to the right areas within the system. The system itself is really just a document library here within SharePoint with some built-in automation. We'll come on to that in just a second. But it's a really nice way just to be able to at least drive traffic to perhaps the most frequently visited areas of that particular document library. That could be sorted by potentially folder structure, maybe aligned to some of the categories that you'd like to assign your documents to as well. So we can certainly come on to that. Now, thinking about the landing page, great. We've got a large tile here where we can view all documents, and that's exactly what we're going to do next. So if I click on documents here, this is essentially quote unquote the system, if you like. It is the document library here within SharePoint. It calls on some of the data that we can see in front of us to basically bump the document along its process. And it's a really nice, simple system to manage and maintain. So we'll have a little look. We'll use this complaints policy here as an example. And what I'll do is I'll just simply talk through the complaints policy and all the columns that are associated with the data underneath them against each of the policies here in this example library. So we have our documents over on the left-hand side. We've got some example documents here. And for the complaints policy, straight away, I can see some information regarding its department that it's related to, its approval status, its version number. We've got review and approval dates a little further along. We then have review periods tied to that as well, who the named reviewer and approvers are for this particular document, a tracker group and a tracker required column, as well as a key document, simple yes or no field at the end. We'll come on to the tracker piece in just a moment. But to look at these columns from left to right. Actually, the first piece of interest really is within these three dots. Whenever you see three dots anywhere in Microsoft, it always means more actions or more options. By clicking on that, the one piece I wanted to highlight is this version history. The version history within SharePoint is great. It allows you to basically get a full audit history of your document. So you can go ahead and you can look at the previous versions. We saw that the most recent version for this document was version 6.19. Now I can scroll all the way down throughout all these previous versions here and go ahead and look at any version that there has ever been for this document, all the way right down to the very first one that was created back in 2019, we can see. We're able to go ahead and do a couple of things against these versions. So for version 4.1, it could be that I want to check that out and see what it was like. So I can use that drop down there next to the date, and I can choose to view that document. So I can click on view, and that will basically take me to that version of that document, how it was at that time. So that will open up in a different window. I'm able to maybe do some side-by-side comparisons to the latest version, and I can basically check it out and see what it was like. It could be that what I do like, and actually it was a better version of that document. So perhaps what we have now, maybe now we've made a couple of mistakes along the way and we'd like to kind of go back in time, and you can certainly do that using the restore feature here. So that restore feature in the drop down does exactly that. It will make this previous version your most current version. So it's a really nice way of just being able to rewind time. I can go ahead and make this, the very latest version. That, of course, would be version 6.20 in the list here. And that just becomes the very latest version in the version history. I suppose version history as well, really, really useful for auditing purposes. If you do need to prove to an ISO auditor that you've kept track of these versions, you're able to go ahead, show them this as evidence within your SharePoint environment. And you can capture basic information like when that review date was updated, when the document is going through major approvals. You can capture some additional data as well. So we can see the approval status was approved here. The next review date was set underneath. We can see who the approver was. You can even capture comments as well within the system. So every time you make changes to this document, you can go ahead and add comments that bump it up to that next minor version, and then look ahead to publishing the next major version. Again, something I'll come on to in just a second. But version history, really, really powerful within the SharePoint environment. So again, that's accessed using the the three dots, sorry, and then you go to version history. So a really useful tool to be able to show auditors or track your version history of your documents. Next column we come along to is the department. And this is a column that's been custom created. Doesn't have to say department here. You could prefer to have this as a category. Maybe you sort your documents into types like work orders or policies, procedures. So you could go ahead and replicate that with a column like this. But for the purposes of the demonstration, we've got department here, and I'm able to sort, I can filter, and I can group by the different options that we have in here. So for departments, if I filter by IT, click on IT, you can see my filters being applied at the top of the list here, and all the documents that are appearing are aligned to that IT department. So a nice, quick, easy way for perhaps for me to find the documents that I'm looking for. And your filters can stack. It could be that I'm interested in IT documents where there is a certain reviewer, and if I select Jenny from the list as my example, we select Jenny there, click on apply. You can see my two filters are being stacked here. So we've got IT and Jenny, and the view that we have obviously corresponds those filters and aligns really nicely to that. So it's a really simple way of keeping track of the different documentation that you have in here. The ability to group, sort, and filter can make finding documentation really simple, so long as that's a process and a method you have in place and it's communicated across the business. Even more powerful is the ability to actually, I suppose, drive traffic to this area. I mentioned that phrase when we were looking at the initial landing page, and you would have noticed that were tiles on that landing page that were named after maybe ISO accreditations, or there was one that said view all documents. And what you can do is you can assign this particular view to one of those tiles. You'll perhaps notice at the top here that the filters can almost be seen in the URL. So we've got filter value 1 equals IT, and then we have filter value 2 equals Jenny. It's just the two filters we've applied. It's there, but it means that this URL is completely unique to the view that we have in front of us. So I can copy this URL. I could go back to the home page. I could quickly change one of these tiles here and rename it to be IT documents handled by Jenny, and we click on that and we're presented with the view that we've just gone ahead and created. So it's a really nice, simple way of driving traffic to the right area. We've done versions of this landing page before whereby perhaps you have a grid of these style links here instead, maybe a 4x4 grid of tiles that look like this, and maybe each one is named after a particular department or a particular type of document. You click on the marketing button and you're taken through to all the marketing documents and so on. So it's a really nice way to be able to help your users find the documents that they're looking for. Right, back to the document library itself. The next column we come along to is the approval status, and the approval status and the version number are linked really closely together. The way that this works is that the approval status will only ever tell you three things. It will say draft, pending, and approved. If it is draft or pending, these versions of these documents are not accessible to everybody. It is only your approved versions of documents that are accessible to the rest of the organization. And we lean on the permissions within your SharePoint site to be able to control who sits in what bucket, essentially. So who fits into the permissions bucket that allows you to see these minor versions, or on the flip side, who allows you to see just the major versions approved. Typically, what we advise is that you would have people who have the edit access to this site so they can edit the documents, and they would very much be your reviewers and approvers. They're going to be people who you would expect to be updating these documents on a regular basis. Everybody else in the business who is maybe just coming here for a read-only perspective, great. They can be allocated to the site visitor permission, and that site visitor permission will only present them with the latest major approved versions. So approved versions will always end in a 0.0, as you can see in the example 4 that we have here. However, in this scenario for this complaints policy, if I was a user that didn't have the right permissions, I would come into here and I would see version 6.0. I wouldn't be able to see version 6.19 like I can do at the moment, and that's because I wouldn't have the right permissions. So I can see the latest major approved version, whilst the reviewer and the approver, they deal with tinkering in the background and updating that, ready for me to go ahead and read when it next gets approved. So really simple way of managing the permissions. For those that are unfamiliar, your site permissions can always be found underneath the settings cog in the top right hand corner. hitting site permissions, and you'll see those three buckets there. You've got site owners, site members, and site visitors. So site owners, people with full control, edit access to the site. Site members, again, they have edit access. They can't manage the permissions like the site owners can, but they're able to update documents and access those minor versions that I've just mentioned. Site visitors is pretty much everybody else. So everybody else who's coming to this site for a read-only experience, great, they're going to fit into that site visitors bucket, and they'll be presented with your latest major approved version of your documents. We then have review date, approval date, review period, reviewer, and approver. And it's those 5 columns there that really just help to kickstart the very simple review and approval process that this system captures. The idea here is that Jenny is the reviewer in this case. When Jenny is ready to go ahead and submit this for approval, she will select the document, and in the menu there is a Submit for Approval button. Clicking on that triggers the workflow. So clicking on that will kickstart the Power Automate workflow that we have attached to this library, which then kickstarts the really simple approval process. And it's going to look at the named approver, it's Joe Bloggs in this case, and Joe will receive an automated email straight to him to say, FYI, the complaints policy, it's been submitted for approval and it needs your final decision. Within that email, there's an accept button, there's a reject button. Clicking on either of those allows Joe to enter in some comments as to potentially why he's making that decision. But of course, there's also a link to the document, so Joe can go and have a look first, make sure that he's happy with what he's seeing, and give that final decision. If Joe rejects the document, we simply bump up our version number by another minor point. So we'll jump up to version 6.20. Jenny will have to go ahead and potentially review any comments that Joe has made and go ahead and actually do that process again. So make the changes and then submit for approval once again. If Joe approves the document, then we're going to start to see some of the information in here populate. So the approval date, that will self-populate based on when Joe has given his final say. So it will stamp that approval date, and then based on the review period, it will calculate the next review for us as well. So in the example we can see here, we've got 12 months. We can see these two dates are 12 months apart. It was approved in that date on 2021, and then it will be reviewed again on that date in 2022. So there we go. It's a really nice, simple system, just like the one that we see here. We can see in this case it's actually 3 months, so we've got a couple of months ahead from the actual approval date, so from January to March, and then the review process will start again. So it's a really nice way to be able to just make sure that your documents are being kept up to date. And there's also additional automated reminders that are baked into these dates here. For example, 30 days ahead of the review date, the reviewer, Jenny, is going to receive an email notification letting her know that in 30 days this document is due for its review. And of course, you'll need to go through that process of submitting it for approval again. Upon approving the document, there are a couple of other pieces that will happen. Those really involve the next couple of columns here, where we have the tracker required column and the tracker group column. The tracker required column is a simple tick in the box. It's really a yes or a no, I suppose. But the tracker required column will determine if there is a tick, yes or no. If there is, then it's going to send that latest major approved version of that document to the groups that are detailed within the tracker group column. And for the complaints policy, we can see here how you can have many groups to one document. So you can have many to one relationship. But underneath, as an example for the disciplinary rules document, we can see that there's a one-to-one relationship as well. So there's an all staff group. And we'd always recommend an all staff group when you're looking at setting up the groups within this system. You're able to go ahead and just make sure that you can apply policies blanket across the entire organization. But there may be instances where you have policies, procedures, documents that only apply to a certain demographic within the organization, and that's where these groups come into their own. They're really, really useful. You're able to go ahead and point the direction of these documents at a very granular level. Now, these tracker groups, these can be plugged into existing 365 security groups that you might have on your tenant. You may already have these set up, in which so if that is the case, great. We're able to go ahead and use those groups as the tracker groups so that you can go ahead and start sending documents out in that manner. Alternatively, we can get quite clever with these tracker groups. We can start to call on information within your Entra ID platform. We can start to look at users' demographics, like their location, their job title, their department, and you can pull all of that custom criteria together and create a custom tracked group. You may have documentation that affects a certain demographic of users within your organization, and it's them and them alone that need to see the latest policy for that particular role. developers in London, or you could have marketing people in Huddersfield. You can go ahead and create all of these different, all of the categories, pile them together into these track groups, and you're able to then send documentation out based on those rules that you've put together. So the tracker groups, really, really useful. You can also have documents in here that won't do that step. So you can see there's a couple of documents here that have the tracker required column that isn't ticked. Now, that just means that the normal review and approval process will happen. That will carry on no problem at all. So in this case, Toby will still submit that document for review by Paul. Paul will approve or reject that, and that's it. But it won't then go ahead and send that to anybody else within your organization. And you may have documents that are like that. You review, you approve them, and that's fine, but they don't need sending out to anybody. Come and read them as and when they need to. So the documents that do go through that tracker system, of course, you want to keep track of, well, who's reading them, who isn't, and you can certainly do that within the document tracker. And you can choose to view the document tracker list however you want to. Some example views we have is the ability to group it by user, you can group it by policy, or you can group it by a simple red yes or no. If we look at the group by policy view, we can see here, we've got a couple of examples there, but for that complaints policy, I can see the expiry date, I can see the date that it was accepted for those people that have read the documentation. But for Steve and Toby here, they're flagged as no, they've not yet read that. They are receiving automated reminders in the background every 30 days with a link to the document asking them to read it and basically mark themselves as compliant. In order for employees to mark themselves as compliant and having actually read and understood the document, there's a couple of ways in which they can do that. They can actually come into their own document tracker on the system itself. You'll have noticed that when I was at the home page, they have the ability to go into their own document tracker. So my document tracker, it will filter by me as a user. And when I click into this, you'll see that on the list here. So over in the top left, you can see the user is filtered straight away by myself. Now I am using our demo account here on the example that we have. It's all fully up to date for the demo user, so all good. They've got nothing to read, but they would appear in this list, and people can go ahead and read the documents, but also mark them as read as well. Underneath this mark as read column that we can see just here is a button. You click on that button and it will mark it as read for you. And it's the same within the automated emails that people receive. So everybody within the document tracker who is aligned to reading, accepting a policy, they'll receive an email. In that email is a link to the document, of course. We want that there. We want them to read it. But also there is a button, and that button will essentially just kickstart a small workflow to say that, yes, I've read that document. It's no good people opening the document and closing it very quickly. That doesn't register as actually having read the document. You're putting ownership on the end user to actually physically click that button to say, yes, I've read and I've understood. So you really are shifting ownership. And it's great because there's conversations that you can have then around, policies, procedures. It can really help out further on down the line if you need to know that somebody has read the policy for whatever it is, then you can go ahead and quickly use this view here to track that as well. Okay, moving on to the track groups. I mentioned earlier how we can look at plugging in existing security groups, or you can go ahead and use your Enter ID or Azure AD as it was known to plug into the custom groups there. So those are the example groups that we saw in the documentation in the system before. It's a really nice way of just being able to keep track of these, and you can add and remove these as you need to, and as the business evolves potentially into different business units and departments, you can add and drop and remove these as well. It's a really nice simple list to keep up to date. So those are the three main parts really to the system. We have the initial home page, that landing page where you can really drive traffic to the right area. You're able to go ahead and just make sure that people are able to view the documents that they need to, and quickly. You want people to be able to come into here and have a really good user experience. So tiles, engaging links that drop them into areas of that document library that they're most interested in are going to go a big way to helping with that user experience. You then have the actual document library itself. This is where you'll see all of your documents here. I know it's not visible on the screen at the moment, but you can have a normal folder structure within here too. I know we just have a list of documents here in the queue. There's nothing stopping you from having a normal folder structure in here. The workflow does not work on a folder level. If you go into that folder, into the sub items, the workflow will work against those sub items as well. So it applies across the board to the entire document library, and you're able to go ahead and keep track of your documents in a normal folder structure just like you would. Within here, of course, we discussed the really simple workflow. So between the named reviewer and the named approver, it's very, very simple to update the information in here as well. There's a really good feature called Edit in Grid View. Clicking on Edit in Grid View will essentially turn your SharePoint library into essentially an Excel spreadsheet in a way. I can click on some of the items here and I can change them. So it could be from 24 months and I want to change it to 12 months. Could be that actually that's standard across the board for everything that we do. So I'm going to update that for everything. And you can drag and drop just like you would do in Excel. It's telling me that information has been updated here too. So I obviously have some pieces that I need to go and address that. So really useful to let you know when things have been updated and what happens next. And then finally, we saw the document tracker. So just going back into that again, we'd obviously looked at grouping this by policy, but for those people that own those policies, they might be interested in seeing, well, who's read it? Where are we up to? How do I go ahead and make sure that people are keeping themselves compliant and up to date? Is there anybody that I need to chase? And you can go ahead and view that really easily within this list here. As I said before, those who aren't reading the documents, they're receiving automated reminders to make sure that they do so, and they have to physically click on that action button, if you like, that marks it as being read and understood. So now you've seen how the system works. We want to share a real success story from a client that we worked with where we helped implement this system and get them better control of their documents in SharePoint. So here's a case study that shows the successful implementation of a controlled document system in SharePoint for Rincon technology. For context, Rincon is a US-based telecom specialist that helps organizations save money and reduce waste by essentially reusing and reselling network hardware. So over 95% of the gear they handle gets a second life. So think about wastage saved, which is really, really good from a sustainability point of view as well, which is excellent. And yeah, they've helped their customers obviously save on that with the second-hand gear too, which is great. So when Rincon set out to achieve the ISO 27001 accreditation, they faced challenges in terms of managing critical documentation. And you were talking everything from policies, processes, approvals, version control, the works. That's where we stepped in here at Valto. So we designed and deployed a custom SharePoint solution that gave them centralized document storage, automated approvals, integration with Teams, that strict version control that they were looking for, and role-based security as well. So not everybody has access to every single piece of documentation. You obviously needed to be part of a certain permission group as well. And the outcome was really clear. You know, Rincon passed their audits with flying colours. They saved a huge amount of time on document handling, and then now have a reusable system in place for future certifications, all built on Microsoft licenses that they owned already. We simply just came in and improved the SharePoint environment that they had access to begin with. And as their CIO, Peter Blair, put it, we passed all our audits with flying colours and never could have done that without all the documents organized so cleanly in the Valto solution on SharePoint. It's a really great example of a CIO that's seen the benefits of SharePoint, that has access to this system already. We've came in, we've fine-tuned it for them, and it's a really great way of being able to showcase what a successful documentation system looks like here within SharePoint. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I hope that was useful for you and gave you some good context on how SharePoint, used correctly, can really help with that document control piece. You know, whether you were suffering from issues of lost documents, whether you had version control issues, whether there was duplicates, or you simply just couldn't find what you were looking for, SharePoint's a really great way of bringing that all underneath one roof, giving you some really good structure around that data, making it so that you're able to edit the permissions really nicely and give people access what they need to. And we're more than happy to help. So if you do have questions, if you'd like a one-on-one consultation with regards to the system that you've seen today, more than happy to talk you through it. Do give us a shout. You can reach out to hello@valto.co.uk. And thank you once again for joining. Thanks very much. Take care.